Not long ago, we heard the Russians saying they were targeting military infrastructure in the port city of Odessa. We're also getting more reactions from the Ukrainian side. President Zelensky did speak, basically calling this attack an act of barbarism. Earlier, we also heard the foreign ministry saying basically they're calling into question the grain deal that was signed on Friday. They even used some strong words about this attack, basically saying this is Vladimir Putin's spit in the face to UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, and who made a huge effort to reach this agreement, for which Ukraine is grateful. And now this is something that the Ukrainians are really concerned about. This attack is basically fueling their skepticism about the mechanics and how this deal will work in practice. The Ukrainians fear that if the port cities are open, if the access to those port cities is open, then the Russians might actually take an advantage and start attacking those cities. So there was a beam of hope that the deal that was signed on Friday could actually transform into something bigger and produce a lasting peace between the Ukrainians and the Russians. But now President Zelensky did say something about that as well, saying that the Russians, they have destroyed every possibility of reaching a peace deal, basically ruling out a ceasefire unless the occupied territory is under Kyiv's control again. Activity over there, like Ukrainian army says that scores of Russian soldiers have been killed and 2 ammunition depots have been completely destroyed in that attack. What we understand that the railway infrastructure has been completely and severely damaged in the region. So the Russians right now, they've been completely cut off, not just from the city itself, but also from a main supply route, and that's in occupied Crimea. So we've been hearing a lot about the Kherson region lately, and it's really strategically important region for many Ukrainians because that's basically the main focus of their massive counter-offensive there, that we've also been hearing a lot about it in the past couple of days, where they're planning to deploy up to 1 million men and to use some of the most sophisticated weapons to counter and get these occupied territories back under their control. So Kherson is really important for Russian soldiers because from there they can easily go deeper inside the country. So that's why we've been seeing the Ukrainians being so determined to get their territory under their control as soon as possible. And it seems that Russia is pushing ahead with its effort to wear down Ukrainians' military, and that's happening across the country, and particularly it's evident in the south. So we have a situation where the Russians, they are repositioning their positions, their army in the south, but also they're adding additional equipment there. That's not a surprise, bearing in mind that just a couple of days the Ukrainians announced that they were planning to arm up to 1 million men with weapons supplied by the West to retake the south. Meanwhile, the Russians also say they're preparing another offensive on the remaining part of the Luhansk region. That's actually the only region they don't have under their control. And in fact, it's the only thing that's keeping them away from having a full control over the Donbas region. And it seems that Russia whole news when it broke out last night, it's a bit of a shock here, and especially this morning when people woke up to this news, because we're talking about 2 senior officials within the government. So when it comes about the security, head of the Security and Intelligence Agency, as we heard in the report, there have been some speculations that President Zelensky was looking to replace him because he wasn't happy with the dealings of his job. He wasn't doing his job properly. It wasn't an easy decision to make because he's an old friend of President Zelensky. He was in charge of his presidential campaign. He also ran entertainment businesses on his behalf before he turned to politics. But when it comes to the Prosecutor General, that's a bit of a shock here because we didn't hear the reasons why aides clarified this morning and said that they have been suspended because they the fighting continues on the ground, and not long ago, in fact, we're hearing that a Russian strike has hit the port city of Mykolaiv, and at least 4 civilians have been killed there. That's according to a local mayor, but he hasn't given any details about that attack, and we're expecting to get more information during the day. But also, there's been fighting in central Ukraine, and residential areas seems to be targeted this time, and we've seen an increase of violence in the Donetsk region, where Russians have been bombarding relentlessly the area in the past couple of days. But what's really interesting, for the first time we're hearing actually Russian separatists in the Donetsk region. They say that at least 40 Ukrainian prisoners of war they have been killed in an attack that appears to be launched by the Ukrainians. What we understand, according to the spokesperson there, he says that those prisoners were killed when Ukrainian missiles hit a prison there. We haven't been able to independently confirm those claims yet. Yes, President Zelensky has taken to Twitter to express his frustration over this attack, because he is blaming the Russians for targeting civilians, because clearly there is no evidence of any military base or any military targets in the area. So he's even saying that the Russians will be responsible for committing all the crimes taking place in Ukraine, and he's definitely urging everyone to stop Russia's actions here, because if we don't want to see any other crisis in the world, Russia needs to be stopped immediately before something even further happens on the soil here. This is something Ukrainians really want to hear, given the fact that 6 months on, the war is still raging here in Ukraine. And there is a reason for that, as we heard, because the country is preparing to celebrate its statehood today. It's the first time since the public holiday was approved by President Zelensky in August last year. So they do have a reason to celebrate, according to President Zelensky. This is something we actually have an official confirmation from a senior military official here. He says there have been several cruise missiles that struck a military base some 40 kilometers away from the capital, Kyiv. He said that one building was completely destroyed. Two buildings were damaged in that attack, but he didn't say and didn't even mention anything about the casualties about that attack. But we also understand that 25 missiles were fired from the Russian position in Belarus this morning as well, but they've been targeting Chernihiv region there. And what we understand, that there have been some casualties, and a number of soldiers were killed in that attack. That military officials also confirmed there's been some casualties over there, but without providing any other specifics of that attack. Now, this is all happening at the same time as the country is marking the statehood day. It's the first time since the public holiday was proclaimed by President Volodymyr Zelensky in August last year. So instead of having big celebration, big parades around the city, we're actually seeing more attacks targeting the Kyiv region in the past couple of hours. There has been more attacks reported in the Kharkiv region. What we understand, 2 people have been killed and 19 wounded in the latest series of attacks. But several targets have also been hit across the Donetsk region. The local governor there said that 2 schools have been completely destroyed by cruise missiles. They also say that attacks have been reported in different parts of that region, but at this point we don't understand if there's been any casualties so far. According to a report released by the British military intelligence, the Russians are closing in on Ukraine's second largest power plant. And according to that report, they're finding that the Russians are actually planning to capture, the crucial national infrastructure that Ukraine possesses, and that of course considers power plants that's Ukraine controlling right now. But also they want to step up their efforts, they want to extend their offensive, but also go further and capture the cities of Kramatorsk and Sloviansk. And we heard that report that the fighting is still ongoing there. And now we heard the Russians saying they want to expand their military targets beyond the Donbas region, but there's so many questions regarding that military strategy, because in the past couple of days we've heard numerous reports suggesting a shortage of ammunition, food and water in the Russian army. And also President Zelensky has called for more sanctions, more tougher sanctions against Russia, because he wants to weaken the Russian finances coming from gas and oil, so Russia won't be able to finance the war that's taking place here in Ukraine. There is a sort of sense of optimism here because everyone hopes that the grain will finally leave Ukraine. We heard President Zelensky actually just hinted, basically saying that we have to wait for the news from Istanbul, but he hopes the ports will be open really soon. So we have tons of grain that's stuck here in Ukraine. I'm talking about 22 millions here, and it cannot hit the international markets simply because ports are being blocked. How do we got here? Very simple. Since the war started in late February, there has been some major territorial gains around the Black Sea area, which basically is working for the Russians, and they are in a position to control these ports. Now, on the other hand, we have the Ukrainians who have actually laid mines across their region. So, as you can see, there is a major lack of trust between the two sides here. So everyone is wondering how this deal is going to be implemented. There have been some indications that it might be some sort of a ceasefire, but whether will that ceasefire actually hold, no one really knows. But there is optimism that this deal needs to be in place because it needs to reduce the world hunger crisis and food crisis that we're dealing now. So everyone hopes that that grain will leave Ukraine as soon as possible.